Okay, so we're live. Uh, Hello, everyone. Welcome to this GWT Q&A with Colin Alworth. It's a real pleasure to have you here. Um, so Colin is a GWT in the GWT community since 2008. He's a user of GWT, a contributor, and even a GWT steering committee. So maybe we can just kick start it with you can tell us a little bit about who are you, what do you do, and all that stuff. So go ahead.
Sure, thanks. Thanks for doing this again. Someone has a question already. Is this starting? Yes, we are starting. So yes, as you said, my name is Colin Alworth. I'm a developer at a company in Minnesota called Red Current. We're a platform for discovering events in the Twin Cities. And as you said, I'm also a member of the GWT community, our GWT community, and I sit on the GWT steering committee and try to make contributions wherever I can. At Red Current, my role is specifically around building tools for developers and our internal users to do their work, their jobs more effectively. And this has included tools to scrape local web pages and normalize the content that they have so that we know exactly what times things are happening at and what images well advertise these events. And then once we've collected these calendar events, to build admin interfaces so that we can administer the content, make sure it's all good, up to date, good looking for our local users.
Cool. So yeah, thanks for this introduction. Just a reminder to everyone that is watching, you can ask questions at any point in time, and it will be a pleasure to answer them. So we have a few question lined up that I can ask to Colin, but it's always a pleasure to ask a question from the community. So feel free at any point to use the Q&A widget, which is on the side of the Hangout, to ask questions. So you introduced yourself very well. So and you said where you work. Can you talk a little bit about what's your role there? So you're a developer,
Yeah, I'm one of a handful of software developers we've got here, one of several back-end engineers. My role has changed back and forth from monitoring and building tools for the scraping side of things to also now helping to build the new web server that runs things. So I do a lot of work with JAX-RS, Jersey, and then building simple admin interfaces in GWT that use just a request builder and grab JSON from the server and display it on the client for some simple way to use it. We're not using GWT for our actual client-facing UIs right now. We found that we've got some other developers who are very good at what they're doing there, and we need to make them quickly and use those developers for what they're good at. And what I'm good at happens to be more staying in Java and making sure we reuse all these Java libraries we've written for managing dates and figuring out how recurrence rules work correctly. So I stick in Java and I do that work.
Great, cool, thanks a lot. So can you? What we like to ask to our guests is when they start use GWT and why they start using GWT. So what brought you to use GWT in the first place?
Sure. So let's see. It was about 2007, December 2007. I joined a team that was mostly Java developers with a few JavaScript developers, and they had built a very large tool in JavaScript, but meant to be run at runtime by the server. And the server was written in Java, and it would say, "Here's what I want you to do." And it was this very large, kind of awkward framework to decide what widgets to display when. And we made the decision that with having someone like me on board who was previously only doing JavaScript work, everything HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and making very large web applications, they introduced me to this thing called GWT that they thought was a pretty good idea to compile Java to JavaScript. And I thought it was totally bonkers. Why would you have people write in the wrong language for this tool? Why would you not just teach them how to write good JavaScript? It's not that hard. Come on, guys, you can do it. But the point we got into was that we've got all these Java developers who know what they're doing already. They've got good ways of managing the rest of the project. They've got lots of tools at their disposal that I, as a JavaScript developer, had not had historically. And so little by little, we worked our way into it. And by mid-2008, we were picking up some other projects and trying to turn them also into GWT and GXT based to have lots and lots of our internal admin interfaces and eventually some external interfaces built out of GWT as well. So we used GWT, I think 1.53 at that point, and GXT 1.2.3, and we made our way over over a couple of years to GWT 2, and I think GWT 2.1, and the intervening versions of GXT as well. And I had a lot of fun working with the guys at Sencha in that time. And after a few years, I actually joined the Sencha team to work on GXT itself directly, building those tools themselves rather than just implementing things with them. And I taught training and continued to help with the GXT3 release, and then have made some contributions back to GWT here and there along the way.
Cool. It's interesting to have a point of view of someone who comes from the JavaScript world that came to GWT. Usually we have Java developers who use GWT to do web development, so it's interesting.
Yeah, and it might be my experience coloring my particular vision, but I almost find it easier to teach existing browser developers how to use GWT than it is to take a Java developer who's accustomed to the server and try to teach them all the event issues and how MVP and whatnot works. Cool. But that's just my experience.
Yeah, cool. So we seem to have some problem, I guess, because somebody is asking the question, will this start soon? So we've already started. I'm sorry if you don't see us or hear us. So maybe someone else can just post a question to make sure that everything is fine and that you see us and that you hear us. Does somebody else want to just... Yeah, just can I have feedback of somebody who just to make sure that.
Yeah, is there a chat so we can tell people that it's working, or or the Google Plus event? I'm trying to find the Google Plus event itself.
Yeah. So I just
don't know if everyone else can see that. Yeah.
So it says that I have 8 people in there for the moment, but I don't have a response. So maybe
sure. Well, it's at least being recorded. Yeah, it shows that it's live. I'm going to mute my mic real quick and make sure it's. Yep, we're live. I can play it. I can hear myself about 15 seconds ago. So I think we're going.
Okay, so the person that asked the question just wrote, okay, that worked. So, okay, thanks. We're glad. Okay, and Renault says, yes, you just have to refresh the feed. Okay, so everything's fine. I think we have our it working, great. So, yeah, so cool. So we're talking about you coming from a JavaScript. Yeah, cool, I can hear and see. Great. Thanks, and feel free if you have questions to ask at any point. We did the presentation and asked some basic question about Colin's background, if you missed that part. So we're talking about how he come from a JavaScript world to the GWT world, and Sencha in particular, and working on these tools. So yes. So maybe we could tell a little bit more about what's your role as a GWT maintainer, and which part of the code are you responsible for?
Sure. So as a maintainer, it's actually kind of a weird arrangement. The way that we assign maintainers is not necessarily the code you're responsible for writing.
Okay.
It's just code that you are sort of responsible for reviewing and hopefully finding other people to make sure that they work on it. So technically, I am a maintainer for the CSS resource and client bundle parts of GWT. And this is largely in part due to the time I spent at Sencha and the work I had done at the time trying to get these various pieces to work correctly, and also the large body of knowledge that we at Sencha accumulate around what other customers are doing with these tools, both at Sencha and then also externally. So my name is on there. I take a look at the reviews that come in. A lot of this is coming from Julian, who built the GSS resource tool, making sure that a lot of this still makes sense, that we can have features not be lost as part of these large upgrades to migrate to GSS. So it varies a little bit, but that's the part of the code I've been reviewing and I've been a consumer of. But as a contributor, as opposed to helping to review and maintain, I find myself just saying, okay, what things do I wish I had in GWT, and making sure that they happen. So in the case of Java 8, this has been the Stream API. This is something that I thought was very nice to have in Java, and was trying to figure out how could we have it in GWT, how could we get it in our client code as quickly as possible. And so I have to especially thank Jens and Andre for helping me to make this happen. Jens went through and built all the various interfaces that are required in Java 8, function, by function, consumer, producer, and optional. And once he had built all these, then Andre was able to go through and build Splitterator. And the Splitterator is really the core of how the stream thing works, and it provides you a way to go through an iterator, but with a handler on it instead, a callback. And then streams, from my perspective, was easy to write on top of that. It was only about 7,000 lines of code, put the whole thing together, and just call into those splitterators and have them actually do the work of ensuring that I always get the right next element to look at as I walk through and consume things.
Cool. We have a question from Renaud. Coming from a GS background, how do you feel about Angular being so popular compared to GWT?
It's an interesting question. Unfortunately, when I was still writing a lot of JavaScript in 2007 or so, Angular wasn't a thing. It wasn't even an idea. There weren't a lot of concepts around that didn't look like Java to me. Either it was sort of the jQuery side, or it was the EXTJS side, where it was, okay, either it's lots of little utility functions, make everything look kind of C-like, or it was large and architected and let's make it as Java-like as possible without actually being Java. Dojo also sort of falls into that category at the time. I really can't remember what else was existing at the time. So I hadn't used Angular at the time, obviously. I have since then gotten an opportunity to use it, and as a tool to solve problems quickly, I'm impressed. I like Angular a lot. I like some of the ideas it brings. We had some, as basically everyone does, we had some pretty major performance problems with it. We were unable to get it to display a list of 1,000 things, for example. Because we wanted to have more than 5 or 6 columns, and we needed to have some conditional formatting along the way, and that just boggled my mind. One of the things that people complain about GXT from time to time is its grid can't display 200,000 things. Okay, well maybe we need to back off there a little bit and consider paging some items in or something. But to choke at 1,000 or 1,500 items was pretty mind-boggling for me. So I very much like the idea of Angular. I do have to say, though, I think that people are going to be very impressed with what you can do with a lot of this Java 8 stuff. So if I can share my screen very quickly, as soon as I find the right window, just to show, I've got a terrible example of how to write GWT. This is the canonical how not to do it of, in regular Java, put everything in your main, except in this case, it's put everything in your entry point, which we all know. You don't do. The entry point is just how do you get the app started, and then you've got some framework or tool that says, okay, here's how you dispatch to various presenters or activities or controllers or whatever your particular favorite way of talking about the app is. So we have this internal tool. I'm just closing everything else out before I share this. Share screen. Do we not have a share screen button in here?
Yes, it's supposed to.
Oh, there it is. I got it. Thank you. Got it. Okay. So this is just an internal tool to go through very quickly and let us view what's going on. Rather than doing things the correct way of having everything in its own presenter, we've got a whole bunch of menus, and each menu item, every button, just has a quick callback here, a quick handler that says, okay, take the event and then do something. Or here's a button that just runs a method. Here's a button that runs another method. And each of these methods, this is terrible and disgusting from a Java perspective. I should not have a 600-line class doing all this. I should have a 200-line class, or maybe a 50-line class, and then this show profile list Okay, so it's only, 20 lines long. It still should be its own class. It still should be completely factored out somewhere else. It should be a single widget that just does these things with encapsulating this logic, and it should live somewhere else. But because all this Java 8 functionality is so simple to add in here, it ends up looking a lot like an Angular controller in that it just owns everything it has here. There's a few pieces of actual markup and whatnot that get factored out, but the controller itself lives just in one single place. A little bit of UI gets mangled here and there, and then you've just got other calls you can make outside of there. So I love the idea of Angular. I think that there's some interesting stuff we can get out of there. I think we're going to get a lot of stuff by simply improving the language as much as we're doing right now. I think that there's some ideas we've got here inside of Redcurrent, like this simple cell, which is really just a regular abstract cell, but with a lambda to do the rendering work. So you can just say, here is the render. I think there's a lot of cases where we can say, let's make these things simpler. I'm not sure we need to become Angular. I'm not sure there's even much we need to emulate from Angular. The stopping screen share, there we go. Given how much Angular is rebuilding itself into Angular 2. But that being said, I also have a lot of problems with how Angular treats the whole directive idea, how it says, okay, you can make a new way to handle a attribute. I'm not an expert. I could certainly be wrong about a lot of the understandings I have about how it works, so I don't want to dig myself too deeply into there and have people say, well, Colin is wrong about this, therefore everything he's saying he's wrong about. So I'm going to, back up here and say I'm not an expert.
Great. Thanks for answering the question. And to the other viewers, feel free to ask a question at any point in time. As I told at the beginning, some of you were in there. So yeah, feel free to ask question, and Colin will have a pleasure to answer your question. Cool. So thanks for the thorough answer on that. So yeah, so could you tell us a little bit more about what are your current project in GWT? So you're working on streams. So
yeah, streams is, like I said, sort of been the thing I was particularly interested in. For those who are not using Java 8 much yet, streams are a way to talk about how you process data, and you build up your process of how you handle the data. Here's an initial source of data. Here's how you filter out items you don't need, transform every item in this way, map it, and then eventually collect it into something else, whether you're joining it all into a string or whether you're building a set or a map or a list out of it, or just iterating over each item in a for each. So streams allow you to append new operations, and then when you finally need the data, it goes through all the items at once, collects them all in one spot, and then you've got your output. Yeah. And as part of our internal tooling, we had built an entire language out of how to do scraping and how to process other websites. We built this all with streams because it was just the simplest way for us to understand what we were doing and make quickly testable, easy to write stuff. So my project then was, okay, how do we emulate streams? How do we actually make GWT do all of these things?
And in Java, it's a really powerful tool, so it's really great that it's coming to GWT, so I'm thrilled by that.
Yeah, it's amazing stuff. I really enjoy working with it. I can show a little bit here, or if you want to go over another question.
Yeah, I'll go to the question maybe later on. Yeah. So Bruce Scott says, not a question, but having Java syntax compatibility is the biggest strength of GWT. Yeah, so I think
the syntax, the tooling, the existing JUnit things, which to be fair need to grow with the times a little bit, but the fact that we can still use Maven and just say run this unit test and it runs. Obviously, we need emulation at some level, so that's something that we as a community, need to step up and build if no one else is interested in it. But yes, the syntax and the compatibility with the existing ecosystem. Totally agree. That's what makes GWT so powerful.
And the already existing editors that are already working with Java really well, so we're leveraging that. Yes, sorry, you're right. Another question, do you think GWT popularity now depends solely on its community? How can the community contribute to GWT without having a senior background?
Great question. So there's a couple different facets to this. GWT's popularity is sort of weird because it has the downside of being a stable tool. It is a compiler that turns Java into JavaScript. The next iteration is going to do even less. It's not going to do the linking work. It's not going to add code gen features because the existing Java community has grown in a lot of ways, and so is the JavaScript community. We've got tools on each end that solve those problems even better. We are going to be able to continue to write Java and have it compiled to JavaScript and work in these web apps. So what more is there we need to do? Well, we always optimize. Every release, at least in the apps that I've measured and looked at, get something like 3 to 10% faster every release of GWT. They tend to continue to get smaller. And these are really core things where we need use cases. We need bugs. We need to be told what is broken. And I say we, but most of the work in this area is done at Google by the Google team for GWT. I don't do a lot of work with optimizations in particular. I find bugs, but I'm not one of the people who's actually going through and figuring out what is it that makes a browser fast or a browser able to handle our code quickly. So I'm definitely a member of the community in this regard. I need to find those issues and bring them up and say, so this seems to have gotten worse. Why? How can we make this stop happening? And how else can we contribute without having that senior background? There are a lot of ways that the community can be made better without just adding more code to the project. There are other projects that are out there. There's other pieces of the ecosystem. We're anticipating breaking out things like UI Binder, RPC, Request Factory, internationalization to their own projects in the nearish future to make them easier to contribute to. But there's also lots of other small projects out there that can use contributions to be made better. I myself have several. I don't want to, call them out specifically and say, let's all use my stuff here. But there's a lot of tools out there that are competing to say, we're the best way to make GWT, make your GWT projects. Mm-hmm. And there's also documentation. We've got a lot of things on the GWT project site that get out of date from time to time. There's still references to the legacy dev mode as we're trying to move into super dev mode. And as people learn something, or as they've said, okay, now I've gotten through all these hurdles with bad documentation from 2 years ago, or okay documentation from 2 years ago. If the attitude is, so what have you done for me lately? Why do I need to actually improve it now that I know it? That's not a great community aspect. We need to be coming back and saying, okay, this particular part of the documentation is wrong, or incomplete, or misleading. I can spend an hour and change it and improve it. And we will almost certainly have that change accepted and added within a week to get up on the website. It's just through GitHub. We just use Markdown, and then you push a button. We merge the pull request, and it's out there.
Yes, and I think what you mentioned is really really good. For example, I think I'm not sure if that's already still the case, but a few weeks ago on the GWT side, there was still the stock watcher example, for example, is still with the old dev mode and old way of doing things with the So if you search for something to improve, the GWT site is on GitHub, and you can do a pull request. Anybody is free to do that.
And even if all you know is how to make a simple project and turn it on and debug it, you already know enough to be able to improve documentation. Now, this is both a way to say anyone can help, but this is also a way of saying our documentation needs help. We are in a kind of sorry state that we've got inconsistent documentation. This is a problem. This is something we need to deal with. I'm not concerned about the state of the compiler. I'm not concerned about the state of our emulation. Our documentation does need to be improved, but there are people who are still continuing to learn and pick up GWT on a regular basis. We could be concerned there. It's hard to say. We don't focus as much in the GWT world on the immediate onboarding and getting things going as fast as possible so you can make your to-do MVC in 25 minutes and get it out the door. GWT focuses on apps that need to live for years and years and have 10 million lines of code. It's sort of a different focus, unfortunately. Or fortunately. I think it's both.
Yes. Cool. Thanks for the answer. With GWT, we share code with server, client, and test.
Yep, that's exactly what we're doing here. We've got exactly the same Java code running streams with streams on the back end, and that is what actually runs the production scraping for us. And then we wanted to have it run in the browser as well. We emulated the WebDriver API by just wrapping it in some async stuff. And the browser actually has a plugin that allows it to control itself and click on things and see exactly what the page should be doing and make sure the content is there. Exactly. We use exactly the same code in all three places.
Great. Another question, will you talk about release timelines?
Yes, favorite question for everybody. It'll be done when it's done. This has always been the policy of GWT as long as I've been involved with it. We are not willing to release a half-finished product. We're not willing to release a broken product. We would rather have the timeline slip month after month after month, as frustrating as that is, as absolutely frustrating as that is for people who are depending on it downstream. The Java emulation that we're doing, for example, we need to have streams. Streams need to have splitterator. Splitterator needs to have optional all these interfaces. It's worth noting right now that I believe every patch, except for the stream patch itself, has been merged and is ready to go. We're now looking at a couple of bugs in the compiler itself that have been exposed. And once we've got those resolved, we should be in and then the stream patch itself merged, we should be in a position to say, okay, let's cut a release candidate and start going forward. But we're definitely not interested, not even interested at all, in releasing half-finished code and keeping it as the stable version that lives on Maven Central forever. Now, what we do have is nightly builds that go out to Snapshot every night, and there are a number of companies out there, including Google themselves, who use those as production releases. They use that code, they ship code with it daily because it works. Now, occasionally you'll hit a bad version. With Maven Snapshot Management, you can say ignore that release, stay on the old one. There are also companies who will say grab a snapshot, okay, wait 3 weeks. Grab a snapshot, wait 3 weeks. So they can always use the latest one. We take that approach here at Red Current. So we have a slightly older version of GWT that I've added all the Java 8 patches to. And I keep it rebased constantly. It's in my personal GitHub repository for GWT. It's called Streams for Review, and it always includes all the latest stuff. Right now, that's exactly one patch, so it's not very it's not very handy right now, but that one patch means you've got all the Java 8 features ready to go. Cool. So when are we talking about doing this? Ideally, within the next week or so, we'll have a release candidate, assuming everything goes right. Can I guarantee everything will go right? I will not guarantee that. I will not make any promises about that. I would rather we wait another week or two and fix some random other method reference bug or some defender method bug. I would rather we wait and get it right and release a solid 2.8 than have to release a 2.81, 2.82, 2.83 and see demos for years and years in the future and people on Stack Overflow for 5 years into the future saying, well, I'm using 2.80 and this isn't working. We still see people who are using 2.2 or 2.0 or 1.6, even though there's even a 1.61, a 1.70, a 1.71. We still see people doing that and complaining that those things don't work because they use those. So this year, yes, exactly. So we're certainly going to do it this year. I cannot see any way that we would not release it within the year. I would be very confident saying it'll be even this summer. But don't hold me to any of that because we have to release it when it's ready.
Cool, and I think it's a good attitude to say, especially when you have millions of lines of code in production application all over the world, that what you release is stable. So that's an important part, I think.
Right. If people are willing to say, give me the latest right now, it's ready. It is stable. Stuff is working. I would encourage you to use snapshots. But if you are not willing to and you want the stable release, there's ways we can make it go faster, but almost all of them involve you becoming an expert or using the snapshots right now and reporting tests. I would guarantee 80%, 90% of the people who ask me on a regular basis, when is the next release ready, are not using those snapshots, are not reporting bugs. I have a hard time sympathizing. But I do understand their perspective, but I also have to reflect that if people aren't testing, we have no way of knowing what's broken.
Yeah, you're right. So maybe what can you tell us a bit about GWT and its evolution going into the future? And
sure. So the current big idea out there is that GWT 3 is going to integrate much more closely with the Clojure compiler. GWT 3 will be itself just a way of compiling Java into JavaScript and then declaring some dependencies back and forth the way we have imports in Java to say this class requires this class. Here's how they all need to be built in which order. And then take all these gigantic JavaScript files that it creates and have Clojure compile them. We've heard in some anecdotal cases that even already what they've got, and this is entirely inside of Google, is doing some amazing stuff, but there's a lot of work still to go here. What do we expect in terms of what we users will use? The big expectation, the big promise right now is that it will continue to use all the emulation code that GWT itself uses. So anything you currently use in the JRE will continue to work. Anything in JS interop will continue to work, that it will use exactly the same libraries. So the same libraries that you're creating, the modern libraries we're building now for GWT 2.8 will continue to work into GWT 3. That's the expectation there. Now, some things will change. We're expecting JSNI, JSNI, to disappear at some point. We're expecting the JavaScript object with its ability to cast for free and with no penalties between various types. We're expecting that to disappear at some point. We're also expecting generators to disappear because Java itself has added APT, the Annotation Processing Toolkit, which is a way for us to say, here are some interfaces with some annotations on them. Please generate the code that we need. And we don't have to rely on a tool like GWT to do that generation for us. That is going to be a bigger change that's going to have to be made. But for the duration of the GWT 2 series, we're still going to have those pieces. Reflection. We're not going to, in the toolkit itself, have reflection. It's just going to be an emulation of the JRE pieces we have today. So why don't we use reflection? There's a bunch of reasons for this. Why doesn't Clojure itself let you reflect when you write JavaScript and have it turn up the optimization to the highest possible level? It's because when you have any kind of reflection like that, you can no longer say, okay, this method here is only called from these particular places. Let's go ahead and actually inline it in those places. Or we've noticed all those places always have the final argument as 4. Let's go ahead and remove those arguments and put the argument inside the method itself. And then because it's always 4, this if statement disappears entirely. This loop is simpler now. We can get rid of it. So a lot of optimizations are no longer possible. We can't remove code that we can't prove you don't use. If nowhere in your application uses this particular toString, but you might reflect in and call it, we can never remove it, which means anything that toString calls can never possibly be removed. So it causes some pretty big bloat problems. There's a brand new Java emulator in the browser that just came out. I can't remember what it's called right now. But it only takes about 20 megabytes of downloads before it starts working because it has to pull in every jar that it might possibly ever use. Now, that being said, reflection is still possible in APT just like it is in GWT generators. You can still go through and say, okay, as I'm compiling, let's look at every type that's possible, and let's build some specific code that does this. So you can build generators that support reflection, and they build reflection even. You can say, well, only these methods that are annotated with, it has to be available at runtime will be reflectable. You can certainly do that. That works very well. There's a number of people out there who are doing something like that, such as the GWT exporter tool. There may be better things out there, but it's very hard to do this in a nice general way which doesn't cause tremendous code bloat. So usually when someone says they want reflection, what they actually want is a very specific feature or a couple of specific methods or fields they want to access at will, and not reflection, not general reflection. So they're often better suited to build some code generation tool that solves their specific problem without effectively any code bloat at all.
Cool.
So yes and no is the answer to that question.
Cool. Cool. So I think you talked a little bit about the future of GWT. I was wondering, with the Google I/O starting today or these days, do you know if there is something related to GWT in Google I/O these days, or
I'm not personally aware of anything, but that doesn't mean there isn't anything. I think it's also true that we're seeing on a regular basis new products coming out of Google that are using GWT. In the last year, we had Inbox, then we had Spreadsheets. Flights, I think, was a little older, and so was Groups. So these are somewhat high-profile tools that are using GWT at some level to get their work done. I don't think we necessarily expect to see a big announcement about GWT because it is a fairly mature tool. It doesn't have flashy things. There's no integration in the compiler itself to Android Pay or something else that they're trying to push very heavily. So it doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. Now, you do see some things like Angular that will get a lot of attention, but Angular is in the process of a reboot, effectively. Yeah. There's going to be a brand new version that's coming out, and things are, and maybe they've actually solidified the 2 API. I don't actually know. But even if they had, it's brand new. It won't have settled yet. They won't have the kind of stability that, as personally, I like to see that GWT has, that we can guarantee your 4 million line application or 200,000 line application will continue to behave like it's Java. Mm-hmm. That's sort of a guarantee that is not a flashy thing to put up on a Can you imagine the slide deck behind me saying it still works, it's still faster than handwritten JavaScript, it's still smaller than handwritten JavaScript. What more do you want? It would be a very short discussion.
Wow, cool. Great. I pretty much ended my question, and I don't see other questions. So maybe if there are no more questions, maybe a little bit final thoughts on this Q&A on GWT, on whatever you want to plug.
Yeah, I would encourage people to check out the streams commit. It is on, let me just pull it up here and show you where it is, because there's a lot of interesting stuff. I learned a lot more about streams by building this than I ever did by using it.
Yes, I guess so.
So, for example, all the various ins and outs of exactly how does this work. Can we see my screen? Yeah, it looks like we can. So emulate Java 8 streams. It is at GWT googlesource.com. It's a huge patch, changes a lot of things, but going through and seeing exactly how does it handle this particular case or that particular thing. You know, what if I've got an array of ints and I need to do something with it? There are changes in arrays itself that let you say, okay, here is how you stream an array. Okay, well, what if you want to stream an array and start at some point and stop at another point? Well, it turns out that, you know, all of this is emulated just by calling, you know, one of these stream methods, you know, int stream of this array, skip this many things, limit to only those many things. Once you're in something like int stream itself, all the various interesting things you can do in there, if I can read, there we go, int stream, to say, okay, I want to find the average of all of these things. Okay, that'll end up having to be a double, because if you add a bunch of ints and then divide by an odd number, you know, you might end up getting some fraction, so it has to do that. Exactly what do all these collect things mean? What is the supplier doing in this case? What is this accumulator for? Why don't we use this combiner thing here? Well, GWT doesn't have the ability to process work on more than one thread, so we don't actually need to break work into small pieces, spin them off on separate threads, and do things. So does it actually matter which combiner you pass in? Right now, no, but you'd still like to hold up the API. So there's a lot of things like this in not only this patch, but in the various other patches that Andre and Jens have put together that I found to be very interesting. And I've learned a lot about exactly how does Java 8, what tools does Java 8 bring us, and then what can we be using on our server and now also in our client.
Great. So thanks a lot for being here today. It was a real pleasure having you. Looking forward to see you in the community in the days and weeks to come. So yes, thank you, and big thank you everyone for being here. Always a pleasure to have you on board. And this video will be available on YouTube really soon.
And my only one final parting note, as much as I want to say about, you know, releases and we only release them when we're ready, this is not to say that people shouldn't continue requiring that we move forward and that we're, you know, talking about these things in the public. This process doesn't work if we don't have the public side of things. As much as I'm going to say, nope, I can't give it to you yet, we are working as hard as we can, and it is the public's, you know, demand for this that is making us continue to work harder and figure out what things can we cut, what things can we not cut. Maybe it doesn't matter. If no one wants streams, we can release today, actually.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's the case. But if you let us know, be loud and vocal about these things, participate in the community wherever possible, we'll hear you, and we will try to take that into account.
Yes, and it will have an impact on the GWT steering committee, and yeah, so cool. So great. Thanks a lot, guys. And have a nice day.
We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.